Well, thank you everyone for coming. Um, this this is a subject that if you read the blog post I put at stockel.com about this subject, this may seem like a kind of strange time to be talking about data cleanup and data integrity. I know most clients and most organizations I've worked for are very busy at this time for obvious reasons. Um, it's the end of the year. A lot of people are working on the VSE. If you're working for an educational institution, any kind of institution will have end of year mailings to be thinking about right now, end of year events to be inviting your top donors to. And then if you're, say a larger institution, a larger educational institution might have football games to prepare for and donor visits for around that. Lots of places have homecoming. So I titled my blog post "Data Cleanup and Integrity at a Time Like This," and I do think that it is as I say, it is an odd time since it is probably the busiest time of the year for everyone to be working on something like data integrity, it does take up time and probably not the time that you have at this point in the year. So why are we talking about data integrity at a time like this? Well, the obvious and kind of easy explanation is, data integrity is always important. This is something we always need to think about. If something has gone wrong with our data, we can't just say, well, we're going to fix this, when we have some time, because the truth is we never have time. There's always something going on that feels more important than data cleanup or data integrity. However, now of course I have a little bit of bias, but I'd say data integrity is always important. There's always time to fix data when we think about it. And as I'll be explaining through this presentation, there are always small things we can do to improve our data. But to me, one of the other issues is this is one of the times when data integrity and data cleanup are most important. When you're sending out information from your organization, this is the time when you really want to make sure that it's clean, because this is when your prospects, your potential donors, your long-term donors are most likely to see information coming from your office. This is when people actually open their mail, when someone sends out a solicitation. This is when you're printing something on that fancy paper for a holiday event invitation. And the last thing you want is to have someone's name or street name misspelled, or let's hope against hope that, for example, if you're sending something to someone in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that you don't leave the H off of Pittsburgh. This is a high crime, as I well know, being a citizen of Pennsylvania, in the city of Pittsburgh, to misspell the city's name. So this is the time when data integrity, if you haven't paid attention during the rest of the year, can really come back to bite you. And this is kind of like your last time to be able to make sure that your data is clean, especially things which I call forward-facing data, the things that go on envelopes. Um, you know, Even something as simple as making sure that someone's name looks the way they want it to. So when I sat down to work on this presentation, I thought about the fact that, I've given presentations like this sometimes in the past, and some of you may have even attended some of these presentations. And obviously, I wanted to, talk about some of the old tricks that I've used in the past. And really, there are three things that I always think about when I'm asked either to do a presentation or to do data cleanup. The first is to concentrate on the things that your constituents will see and the ways that you're going to reach your constituents. If you have an email address that's corrupt, you're not going to be able to reach your client or your constituents, excuse me, when you send out that email. And as you'll see in this presentation, there are ways to clean up those email addresses in a way that gives you at least a chance at reaching someone. If you misspell gmail.com, you are not going to reach your constituent. But it's possible that if you fix that gmail.com address and send it correctly out to so-and-so at gmail.com, you will reach them. And what I'm going to show you in this presentation may help you fix, a few dozen, maybe a couple hundred of email addresses, at least give you a chance to reach someone instead of having an email just fall into outer space. The second thing I like to talk about is think about the things you can fix quickly. Now, if you go over your database one by one, it's unlikely you'll ever get your database clean, because by the time you've looked at the last record, bad data has entered your database and you're going to have to start all over again with your database probably in the state it was in before you started. However, if you concentrate on the things that can be easily fixed, the things that kind of stick out as wrong, and I'll be showing you some of those things in this presentation, you can kind of flip Murphy's corollary on its head. Murphy's corollary is that the first 90% of the work takes 90% of the time, and then the last 10 takes the other 90% of the time. So what you want to aim for is getting 90% of the work done in 10% of the time. Bill Gates once said that he loves lazy people. He says, because lazy people will come up with a way of doing things without expending as much work. And I mean, I don't like to work more than I have to, obviously, especially if, I'm charging clients billable hours. I don't want to charge them more than I have to. So I try to concentrate on the things that will give them most. Mary Ann says that was one of Ben Franklin's invention, the motivation between Ben Franklin inventions as well. I think Frank Zappa did that too. He once said anything played wrong twice is the start of a new song. So yeah, I try to come up with things that will help them the most with the least cost to them, and therefore the least work I have to put through. And I don't necessarily see it being lazy. I just see it as being efficient, and I think you probably feel the same way too. And lastly, it's easier to see errors when you can actually see them and filter for them. And this is partly an excuse for me to use Excel again, I have to agree, but there is a real reason for that. A spreadsheet is something where you have pieces of your database listed in a way that you can see them. And as you also see in this presentation, you can use Excel to kind of filter out the things that don't look right. And you'll get to see examples of what I mean by that coming up in this presentation. So speaking of filter, this is kind of where I'm starting in this presentation by filtering data for an audit. So when I want to clean up something quickly and I want to clean up something that's going to give me the most bang for the buck, I first think about what are the important fields in our database that are going to touch our constituents or going to get our message through to constituents. And namely, those fields are obviously name, addressee or salutation, address, phone number, email address, other contact information, because this is what's going to go on the envelope that goes to our constituents. This is what's going to go, on the first lines of the letter that go to our constituents. If we don't get past those two if our constituent doesn't go past those two barriers, then we don't make a gift. If our constituent gets the letter and sees that we've misspelled their name or their address, then we might as well have just thrown our money away. So these are the important things that we need to look at every time we're doing a quick data audit, because we might not find that many problems, but the problems we do find are mission critical to us. So how do we filter? So fortunately, Excel has two different ways of doing this. And one of them is to use a data filter, which I'll demonstrate, and the other is to use a pivot table. Now, there's a third thing that I haven't mentioned called text to columns, which I've really been pushing lately, because as we're going to see, text to columns allows us to break pieces of our data fields apart and then filter or pivot table just those pieces that we've broken apart. That allows us to quickly view bits of our data fields that might be wrong, and we'll be able to see those right away. So before I show everybody these tools, I want to talk quickly about, once we've identified our errors, how are we going to fix them efficiently? Because this is kind of the flip side of finding errors. Yeah, it's going to take time to find errors, but then how do we fix them in our database efficiently? There are really two ways to go back into our database and put information there. One is to build an import. And this is obviously going to be slightly different based on what your CRM is. But what I've found in general is that most imports take about the time it takes to fix completely about 20 records. So the rule of thumb I've built over the years is that if you have fewer than 20 records to fix, then just go in and fix them by hand, because that's going to be faster than building an import and then running the import. And if you have a CRM that tells you to validate imports, obviously you've got to validate them. And even something like 20 records is going to take you quite a while to build that import and then validate and then actually import the data. If you have fewer than 40 to 50 records to fix, and there's only one similar issue to fix on each of them. For example, something might be, hey, I want you to add the constituent code graduate to these 50 records. If you've got something like that, it's probably going to be easier to just go in and fix those records by hand too. Because by the time you've built a import just to add a constituent code, which in some CRMs is not as easy as building other kinds of imports, then by the time you've built that, you might as well just enter them by hand. And you can speed up your hand fixing process, as it were, your manual fix process. And some CRMs allow you to query on specific records. So if you can query on the records with an error or something you need to add, then you can run that query, and then you can open each individual record without having to search on them individually. So you know, in say, trying to think of a non-Razor's Edge one that I've used, in AllTrue, for example, you can query on a list. It'll show you the list of each person ID, and then you can click on that person ID, make the change, close the record, click on the next person ID, and it's a lot faster than having to type in a person ID or someone's name. So I've talked now a little bit about some of the old things I knew about, but there are a couple of things I've started to use in the previous year. And one of the things that I keep seeing over and over again is what I call CSV damage. And I'm going to show you in just a few seconds what CSV damage means. Essentially, CSV damage is caused by databases that can only export to CSV, or in some cases, people just picking CSV as their default export type. Or in the third case, if you've got, say, over 1 million records, if you have a very large database and you've got over 1 million records to fix, CSV or .txt is your only option for exporting a file that large. Unfortunately, CSV causes formatting damage. One of them is one I've listed right here. If you have a zip code in New England or New Jersey that has a leading 0, or if you have leading zeros, your 2 leading zeros for Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands, you lose those zeros when you export it to CSV. The reason is because CSV is not technically a spreadsheet format. Essentially, it just takes data and puts it into really any format. And or just a general format, so just text is just there. And when Excel opens that text, it will take a look at it and say, this looks like a number. So those 2 leading zeros just are going to disappear, or the 1 leading zero is going to disappear, because if this is a number, we don't need those zeros. And so now our database, our data looks like this. Here we go. So you can see here that our addresses in New Jersey and New England have lost their 0. We also might have some addresses like this, which is somewhere in Australia. This is actually a correct zip code, because Australian zip codes only have 4 digits. So how do we fix this damage? Well, I have a pretty simple formula for that. So if we have our list of zip codes and we've made sure to only look at the 5-digit zip codes, because CSV will, if we have a zip +4 zip code, they will correctly it will correctly format that as a text because of the hyphen between the 2 sets of numbers. So let's just look at the zip codes that do not have that hyphen. We can sort that out by just sorting on what looks like a number and what doesn't look like a number. So our formula here is simply LEN, or excuse me, we're going to start with an if then, because we're going to use len, which means length. So our formula is if, and our logical test for our if then else statement is len. So if the length of the text in C2, and C2, and the length only takes one operator, which is the address of the field. If the length of C2 is 5, then we're okay, because if the length of the zip code is 5 digits, then we're okay. That zip code is correct. Then we're going to say C2, because if it's correct, then we're just going to repeat what's in C2. If it's not, then we're going to say, we're going to do a nested if here, because we want to say if the zip code only has 4 digits, we're going to add 1 leading 0. If the zip code has only 3 digits, we want to add 2 leading 0s. So we're going to do a nested if then else statement. And by the way, are we recording this? Yes, we are. Just so you can look over this again if we need to. So our nested if then else statement is going to be, if the first if then is false, then if the length of C2 is 4, then we're going to add a leading 0 by having a text 0 and the information that's in C2. If it's not 4 digits, it'll be 3 digits. We don't really have any 2-digit zip codes. So we're going to have 2 digits and the information that's in C2. And then we do 2 parentheses at the end. Click OK. And our repaired zip for the first one is the same. If we pull down here, we're going to see that we've repaired the one for New Jersey here. Now you might ask, why is this on the left-hand side? Because we've just converted this from a number to a text by adding a 0 in quotation marks. Essentially, we're now saying this is a text 0. We're adding the 0 plus what was in the field here. This now becomes, in Excel's eyes, a text field. But you might say, hey, wait, Greg, we've got this one down in Australia here. We don't want to change that because their zip code is not going to be 06062. It's still going to be just regular 6062. So how do we create something that prevents that from happening? So simply all we do is just add another if section here, and this time we're going to say if what's in D2 equals blank. Actually, let's do it this way. If D2 is not blank, then we're going to say just put what was in C2. And therefore, this whole statement turns into what happens if D2 is blank. And then we need to add one more parenthesis on the end. Now, when we do that, the address in Australia or any other country that might only have 4 digits in their zip code turns into the 4 digits we already had. We can then upload these zip codes back into our CRM. CRMs don't really care whether this is a number or a text field. Maybe there are some CRMs that do care, but I don't know of any of them right now. And that will repair any leading 0s that might have disappeared from our database. Now there's another form of oh yeah. Is there a reason you're not just filtering out the non? Yeah, just so I could show you how to do that extra nested zip code. You could use, and you could use Excel's built-in formatting tools to reformat as a zip code. Maybe I'm a bit old school, but the other reason is partly because of some formatting issues with CSV that I've seen. Sometimes Some of these will be marked as a text and it'll goof up Excel's attempt to try to reformat the numbers correctly. So yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Ellen. We could do it that way. I guess I'm just a bit old school and just do it with length. Um, and yeah, I just did the Australia one really just to show, how you can put in if you have any exceptions that you want to put into a formula like this. Um, yeah, I guess that goes against the efficiency rule I had, but I'm just so used to doing this. This is actually probably faster for me these days. Uh, so let me kind of go back to the slides and show you some other forms of CSV damage. And this is something that's coming up more and more recently, especially the more I think we work with prospects and constituents who are from other countries, or for people who uh, they just want to see their names have the correct spelling. Um, do most of these send direct mail internationally? That is a good question. Um, but this is even good for example, I'm working with a client right now that has a lot of uh, constituents in Canada. So too, I used to work for a university that was literally on the Canadian border, and so they did send to Canada. They didn't send anywhere else. And if you have French characters that don't for example letters with accents or the C with the Sadia, um, they don't appear in they don't appear correctly in CSV. So let me kind of show you what happens if you have something like this. So I pulled this as a kind of dummy from just with the current city and state. So there's no this is just an example. And it also kind of shows how CSV damage happens. So I was quite amused by this first one actually, because did you know there's a country called the Åland Islands? Well, if you didn't know, you're actually correct. There is no country called the Åland Islands. I'm not sure why this constituent put down their country as the Åland Islands, and also made sure to put the correct diacritical mark on the front of their country. The Åland Islands are actually a set of islands in the country of Finland that are populated by descendants of Sweden. And although they're they're given a lot of autonomy, they're not their own country, although a lot of citizens apparently like to say that on their address. But you can also see there are some other problems that pop up in various spots on this database. If I scroll down here, you can see even some pretty some, and I've left off street names. There are a lot more street names that have these kind of errors. And one of the tricky parts of CSV is that for some reason CSV, depending on the type of how should I say it, CRM you are exporting from, you won't necessarily get the same kinds of error. So for example, this one, the city is the Ciudad Autónoma de Buenos Aires. I know just from seeing enough of these that the error character, this odd looking thing, is an O with an accent. However, I've seen the same CSV error, but it didn't look like this. It looked like some other kind of weird character. And when I say that, the first thing you might be thinking is, well, if that's the case, then how can we fix these errors? Because if they're not always the same, how are we going to, make sure we get them sorted out? Now, the good thing about, or the only good thing about this kind of error is that at least it's consistent within the export. So, for example, you can see that this first record, the person under their city put down Mariehamn, Åland, Finland. And you can see that the error character, which is this odd kind of, I don't even know what that's called. Does anyone know what that's called? Followed by an A with a grave accent. That's always going to be this character. So it's this one, a capital A with a I don't, and again, the Unicode name is Latin capital letter A with a ring above. I don't know what it's called in Swedish, but what we can do is we can start making a guide, as it were. So in this column, I'm going to put down error character. And then correct character. So I know that this character is this, and it's supposed to be this. So then, knowing that, what I can do is just copy my error character, put it in the find and replace, and then put the correct character, find and replace. And then I'm just going to replace all. And wow, I'm surprised there were 69 of those in this document. So now all of those error instances have been fixed to the correct format. And we could do the same with this one. Let's do a couple examples here. The error character is here. Insert symbol O with acute accent. And now replace all. We have 340 of those. Now you're going to probably say, okay, that's great if it's obvious what the error character is. But what if we don't know? What if we've got something like, and let me scroll down here to Iceland, because Iceland is the kicker. Because look at all, I mean, this is bad. If you ever had to send things to Iceland, this not only looks bad when you put it on an envelope, but it also is difficult to identify for the postmaster, what the city is. I mean, what's this? Or, what's this? And how do we figure out what it is? So what I usually do, is there an opportunity to build a macro to automatically fix these special characters? Oh, I'm sure I could, but the problem is, as I say, that different CRMs will pump out different error characters, because this is what this is what Nexus, which is a CRM that a lot of educational institutions use, will pump out for error characters. But I've seen other
Yeah.
ones that are completely different. That at
Yeah,
least
but sorry, Greg. I'm the one who
Mhm.
asked the question, and I was thinking about this. I don't want to go in, I don't want to lose an entire Friday figuring out
Mhm.
that that is Reykjavik.
Mhm.
If I already have the
It's
routine, it feels to me like an automated process.
it's I've got to say this actually doesn't usually take as long as it would look from something like this, simply because first of all, most institutions don't have so many international. I mean, this client happened to have 13,000 international clients. So we're not going to have that many. And when you don't have that many, especially if they're all from, say, one country or one language country, a group of countries with the same language, you're really only going to have a handful of these characters. And so it really only take a few minutes once you've identified, because when you do the find and replace, it'll find and replace all 10 of the characters that have issues.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. But let's say you do have a bunch of a bunch of people in Iceland, and you're trying to figure out what this is, for example. So it's actually pretty simple. You just go to um, Google. I'll just make sure I'm there. And we're going to look at the zip code, and it looks like it's zip code 220. So I'm going to go to Google. Postcode 220 in Iceland. And here's the name of. Ha, it's been a while since I've said anything in Icelandic. Haf
Nigeria.
Hafnarfjörður. Hafnarfjörður.
Mhm.
Um, I had an ex who spoke modern Icelandic, so so we can say, okay, that first error character is an O with two dots over it, and the second error character is an F, which is pronounced TH. So we just need to go back in to our report and change this first error character to an O with two dots over it, and copy that for everyone, and the second one to an F. I knew I wanted to look at Iceland because Iceland just has all of these non English characters that appear, and sometimes you will see, just for example, Reykjavik, it's an I with an accent over it. Some people just leave the accent off, just so it fits into U.S. documents or English documents, but other times you'll see the error character. So as I say, I mean, you could say, okay, Greg, but why is this so important? I mean, we don't even send to international, um, to international addresses. Well, really, and of course, I couldn't show you this in this document. Really, my biggest concern would be names. You know, there are some people who really, want to and want to have the Enye over their character. Their name is Pena, then they don't want their name to be Pena. They want their name to be Pena. This is something I saw working in the university, had a large number of Latino and Latina graduates. That this is something that it's not. It may not even be you know a make or break thing for them, but that was something they wanted to see. They just wanted to see their name with the proper diacritical marks. And I think if that's how someone wants their name to be seen in the database and seen in on an envelope, then we should respect that. So that, I think, is the main reason for looking over your database for this for that. And if someone's name has a NA or an accent in a CRM, and it's exported into CSV for you to put in your CRM, you will get these error codes. So it is something, I think, that we should be looking at it and respecting. I think that is the main reason. The reason I obviously showed cities and countries was simply because it's not personal information, but obviously a name is much more personal. So this is an example of some of the things that I've seen. The error character for Nunez being in with utility. The this one was a real city that I found. I believe it was in Finland, where the first and the third characters were both errors, and that makes it kind of hard to find unless you have the postal code. I have to admit, I'm kind of a geography nerd, so I'm used to seeing city. Also playing a game called Football Manager, you learn all these kind of obscure European city names, but even that one threw me for a loop. I think it was Usulumpo, something like that in Finland. Yeah. So there is a way to protect data, whether it's leading zeros or odd character errors that come up because of diacritical marks or non-English characters, and that's called CSV8. Essentially, CSV8 is a form of CSV, so it's a text file, but it allows for what are called non English character sets. So in Excel, this will be called the extended Latin set. It's got most of the letters and non-English characters. Now, it wouldn't have something like Cyrillic characters for Russian or Ukrainian, or anything in a like an Indian or Chinese or Southeast Asian language, but it does have most of the non-English characters I'm using for Europe or South America, for example. It also protects the leading zeros because it can tell that this is a zip code, or this is not something that we're supposed to be removing the leading zeros from. So there are now some programs. In fact, there was a mailing program I used with another client that only accepted CSV8. It would not accept other forms of CSV. So if you have any document with personal information, even if you don't suspect there to be any letters that might not pass CSV, I would encourage you to save in CSV8. It's all you have to do is when you go to File and click on Save As, you can choose under the drop down CSV UTF-8, and that's the CSV8 formula that you'll need to save a document. Any questions so far? I see how am I doing on time? Okay, I see I need to, as usual, I've spent a little more time on things I need to. spend as much time on, and I'll have to rush through a little bit on the rest of it. But this next part, I think, is something that a lot of people run into with email addresses. There are two common email errors that prevent you from sending out an email. One is to find that you don't actually have an email address at all. Every email address has to have one, one @ sign and at least one period. If you don't have that, then the email server will not even try to send your email address because it does not fit standardization. So a very easy way to fix this is to simply export your emails, and then in the next column over, do a count if. And count if essentially says if this field has a character that's an @ sign, put the @ in quotation marks. If and the that's address parts. Try. Oh. Oh, because it's missing. Okay. So the formula for that is a count if, cell where you're looking for the criteria, comma, in this case will be @ sign in quotation marks or period in quotation marks. If that's 0 for either of these, or it's more than 1 for the @ sign, because you cannot have more than one @ sign in the email address either, then it's an error and it will flag in that column. You just have to sort the column. You can just sort the column, or just search for anyone that had a 0 for @ sign, etc. The second common error is when a very common, oops, I was going to highlight that. You can't do that. A very common part of your email address is misspelled. And I always call this the GAML error because that seems to be the most common misspelling for Gmail, which is the most common by far domain name. So how do we fix this? Well, I'm going to demonstrate in the next slide text to columns. I'm sorry, I thought I had an email version of this. It's kind of hard to put dummy emails together on short notice. But essentially, what you do is you're going to click on text to columns, and our separator is going to be that @ sign. What do I mean by that? Well, let me go to our next piece, which is here, and this is some address parts to fix. And here are some random addresses. And Excel has a kind of neat formula called, oops, I didn't have it, I had to show it. Have a neat formula called text to columns. If we click on the data tab, over here, we've got a field called text to columns. And if we click that, we get to a wizard that says, okay, are we going to separate this field out by a certain character or by fixed width, which means we're going to separate out every 5 characters or whatever. In this case, I'm going to separate this out by spaces. So when I do that, you can see that each of these street names is split out, and I can then search through here for anything that's misspelled. I could even stretch that out and do it here too. Now, again, you're going to say, well, you mean we have to look through every one of these fields? Well, actually, no, we can use a filter here. So I can click on data and filter, and then use this drop down at the top of our column to look at all of these. We can, we can look at these, and anything that's misspelled is going to stick out like a sore thumb. So let's say I know that Inverleith is misspelled. It should be something else. So I'll just click on Inverleith, and right now we'll get that Inverleith Terrace. And now, had I had a person that that belonged to, this is just a street name from somewhere, then I can go and fix that. And if we had these as, I'm gonna back up here, and then if we had those as email addresses, we could go into text to columns, delimited, and our delimiter would be other and @. Then we'll have, in the first column, we'll have kind of the username of the person. And in the second, we'll have the domain, which is essentially what email service they're using in the second column. And then we can do the same filter to look for everyone with a misspelled domain name. And the gamel.com will show up pretty easily. And again, we just click the filter. Any other questions while we're going on here? So I mentioned this down here with street names, but this is also really good for city names. And I can show that one because it's easy to put the city names together. So here's a long list of city names. You can tell because I have the leading zeros missing here, I pulled this from a CSV as well. But this one's actually a lot easier. All we have to do in this case is click on our filter that I've already set up. And it looks like this doesn't look right, this Aberdeen. I'm gonna click on that, and we go right to the Aberdeen, Washington. Nope, that's not how Kurt Cobain's home city spells itself. So we can then, since that'll be connected to someone, we can just go in and fix that. Now we can improve this a little bit by yoking the current city and current states together, because as I mentioned in the slideshow, Pittsburgh, PA always has an H, but Pittsburgh, Kansas never has an H. They're both correct, but if we just looked in this filter here and scroll down to Pittsburgh, we don't know if either of these Pittsburghs are correct because we don't know what state they belong to. So I'm going to create a column called city state, and we build that using A2, the city, and space, quotation mark, comma, then space, and E2. And so now we have the city and state. Double click on that little square at the bottom right hand corner. That copies it all the way down. Now I'm going to take that filter off there, put it on here. And so now we can scroll down to the Pittsburghs. Okay. Oh, good. It looks like our Pittsburgh is okay. The reason we're not seeing the other Pittsburgh is because we may have run out of, we probably just ran out of room down here. Yeah. This is a huge one that I should have cut down so you could make sure you can see all the filters. But for example, here we see an error. This town probably is not called both Los Olives. There's probably not a town called Los Olives and Los Olivos in California. I believe it's Los Olivos. But we can easily filter then and take a quick look on Wikipedia to see which one is correct. or just Google Maps. Um, and using this filter, we can just very quickly scroll down here, or we could just throw everything into a pivot table. Just insert pivot table. Okay. We go to a new workbook and rows, and then we just can do the count of the rows by putting in values too. And here, then we can just scroll down here and see what doesn't look right. Here's another one that looks potentially wrong here. Alexander, North Carolina, Alexandria in North Carolina. So I know we only have a couple minutes left, but if any of you have learned anything recently about data auditing that you might want to mention, I would be happy to hear it. And
So, do you mind if I ask a question?
sure, go
Sorry.
ahead.
So sometimes I do data auditing as well. Sometimes, although I usually do it with your advice, like you're practically looking over my shoulder. So I appreciate that. One of the things that I catch is that I catch things like Mr. Kathleen. And so my question is, can I make assumptions, or do I have to pass that to the client? Like now we're being much more sensitive about this kind of thing.
Right. I mean, we can use that. We could use that filtering to at least identify issues like that. And then my suggestion would be to pass those instances back on to the client.
Yeah.
And say, is
What
correct.
do you know?
Right.
Yeah.
As you say, it may well be correct, but we don't want to make that assumption. Whereas with a misspelled state or city, I mean, a misspelled city or street name, obviously it's going to be, correct or not. If there's any kind of issue like that, and usually I do pass anything back to the client before I make changes, even when it's a very straightforward issue,
Yeah.
to say, do we want this fixed?
Yeah. And I think that gender, because we're understanding that gender is a spectrum instead of being really rigid about it. I understand that we don't want to make assumptions either. But
No, no, and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
also part of the reason that I didn't mention, title in instant cleanup, because that's not something I think, because you're right, because these things are not as rigid as they were in the past. That's not something you want to treat lightly. You don't,
yeah,
not something we want to skip over or just make us quick assumptions about.
right. Okay. Yeah, thanks. I mean, I get a lot of puzzled faces when someone says, "Hello, Mrs. Pelletier," because they know that I'm married, and I go, "No, it's Miss Pelletier." Yeah.
I used to get Mr. and my ex's last name, because my
Oh,
stepkids obviously had my ex's last name, so it was just assumed that I also had that last name. So that was that was inconvenient, but
yeah, you and
yeah.
Loretta Lynn's husband, right? Who was the coal miner's daughter?
Uh,
He
Loretta Lynn.
punched guys out for doing that to him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, I didn't punch anybody out. I think because it always
Oh,
happened at my
you're
kid's
too nice.
school, and I didn't want to be known that way. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So is everybody on the call? Are you all working on your data? Or are you like dealing with the tyranny of the urgent, or finishing your lunch? People are stepping off.
I think there was a question back in the chat. I'm not sure. Someone wanted to look at an old slide.
Yeah, we had the question earlier about filtering out non-US zip codes, but
Oh, can you go back to the slide with the fix for no @ or period?
oh yes. Oh,
Okay.
I didn't see all
And
these
I love the
questions.
comment
Wow, there's a
about
lot of
working in a
questions.
carrier.
Holy cow, that they all came really quick. Okay, yeah. Let me share screen. Oops. Okay. So yeah, this is the formula count if, and the formula format is count equals count if left parentheses cell you're counting in, and I left off I should have said include wildcard characters. So this is what I mean by that. Let's say I'm going to US cities to fix, and I want to know if if this includes the letter A, if C2 includes the letter A. So it would be count if C2, and for this case, I want to say does it include an A anywhere in the cell? So I have to put in wildcard characters, which are the asterisks. Because I'm not just looking for a cell that is the letter A, I'm looking for a cell that contains the letter A. So if we were doing this for a email address, we want to know if it had an @ sign, we'd put this character in the @ sign character. And of course, in this case, this doesn't have an @ sign. But if it happened that I added an @ sign here, just make sure that I copy that like that, and I put in count if C3 equals 3, yeah. Hang on. Yeah. Now, because this has an @ sign included, it will say yes or a 1. So that's how you build that count if for the @ signs and also for the periods. Okay. Let's see, what else do we have? Yeah, Power BI is a good way of identifying these errors too. Of course, you're going to be using the same kind of techniques, just using Power BI syntax. Sarah says always putting out emergency fire. Yeah, it's funny how that happens in nonprofit. I remember once trying to say to someone, there are no real emergencies in fundraising. This is not like heart surgery, or this is not life or death, but nobody ever seems to think that in fundraising. So oh, so Mackenzie did a large scale address update, so cleaning these is going to be next project. That's pretty neat. Oh, your mail house may be able to provide you with a list of errors to target with addresses. Yeah, that's possible, because they may understand that there are issues. Obviously, if you are a large mailing house, you usually have a program that tells you the U.S. Postal Service standardized address format, and ironically, the U.S. standardized address format does not accept any of those non-English characters. But as I say, your constituent may want that, especially in their own. May want to see those characters, especially in their own name. Excel now integrates Python. Yeah, that's my next big that's my next big Excel project, to start learning Python so I can integrate it into Excel. And I see Marion laughing about that, because yet another thing, another excuse for Greg to use Excel. So yeah, I haven't done that
Your favorite.
yet, but it is something I'm thinking about.
So I apologize, everyone. Greg and I actually have a 1:15 call with a client.
Yep. So we'll.
So,
Yep.
so last question. Well, any last questions? If you're tired of me asking the questions, because I'll spend all day asking Greg questions. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending. And next month is going to be on. It's going up here. Feast on effective prospect management techniques. So, is that you, Ruthie? Or is that who is that?
Abe, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
Mystery host.
Yes.
Next month.
We set all this stuff up in February, so yeah, that's you. You get to do the
Okay.
gratitude month.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Surprise. All right. Well, thanks everyone, and have a good week.